Welcome everybody. I'm Nick Parsons from AHDB, Head of Dairy Development, and I welcome you all to the GB Dairy Calf Strategy Farmer Forum. And we've got a nice number of attendees joining, which is brilliant to hear a number of speakers today. We've got a number of cameo performances, and I'll touch on that in a second or two, who will be presenting from. But I think just the idea of this is to give you a picture of the activity that's going on behind the scenes to a large degree of the calf strategy. Now, I've come into this partway through, but a number of the industry recognise the need to come together and work together as an industry on the issue of calf euthanasia. And the focus has been since 2020 and focusing on trying to bring industry stakeholders together to work to support the industry and moving it forward. Now, I came in and we've created a couple of working groups, which you'll hear from later on the focus of. But what it is to try and really focus everybody right the way through, farmer and stakeholders, through both the dairy supply chain and the beef supply chain, to help everybody to deliver on the target of the strategy to remove euthanasia out of Great British dairy industry. So I will, if I can move on a slide and another one. Thank you. I'll just touch on, for those who haven't used GoToWebinar before, all the guests are muted. So what I'd ask you to do is, if you have questions, then there's a questions function down the right-hand side. If you expand the orange arrow, if you haven't done already, then please put questions into there. Rebecca Small, out of our team, scientist team, is going to manage those questions for us, and we'll move on through there. The recording of the webinar will be used to share with the wider audience. That's been a factor of how we've managed to reach the numbers we have through lockdown and the activities that we've delivered as AHDB over the last 2 years, and proves to be a very good way of widening the communication out. So we'll record this webinar and it will be available on through the website and on YouTube. So yes, please, Christian, if you could, I'll come on to the agenda. So first of all, we'll work through Red Tractor and the standard itself. We'll look from Marco around the sex semen usage, which has had such a big impact on the activity that we've been working through, and then look at some of the market intelligence with Duncan on what we're doing and how that's having effect on the numbers of calves and the way that moves. Chris Dodds from the Auctioneers Association is going to touch on just maximising the returns and maximising the value for those dairy calves. And then we'll look at some of the activity through the working groups. And those working groups have been focused on the activity both at farm level and also for the beef industry. And Ellen will also touch on the TB activity that we've got, which are all main focuses of the strategy itself. Gwyn Jones is going to pick up and look at the asks for the industry, and that includes farmers, and look to try and encourage people to continue to support us. We'll touch on also the calf week, which is coming up, and then we'll do some questions following that. So please, as I said, please put your questions into the chat as you go through. We'll all come online at the end and hopefully have a bit of a catch up on that. So without further ado, and to keep us to time, we're aiming to finish at 1:30. I will pass on to Gemma, and we'll have the first of the presentations. Thank you, Gemma.
Thanks, Nick. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gemma Holden, so I'm currently the Dairy, Beef and Lamb Technical Manager within Red Tractor. And I'm going to talk to you today about Red Tractor's role within the industry strategy and the new standard which was implemented on the 1st of November. If we could move on a couple of slides, please. Thank you. So the complex nature of the supply chain underpins the need for a coordinated strategy that prioritises collaboration, communication and industry-wide buy-in to achieve agreed commitment to rear all calves with care and eliminate the practice of routine euthanasia of calves by 2023. So Red Tractor's role within the wider strategy is to encourage responsible breeding strategies by breeding calves that are economically attractive to the potential buyers and rearers of beef. Next slide, please. So the new standard was implemented on the 1st of November 2021 and focuses on a written breeding and management policy. This should detail how the euthanasia of calves will not be the routine practice on farm. There also must be evidence that the policy is being implemented on the farm, not just that the policy has been written. So taking the two elements, so the next slide please, the breeding management decision should detailed to reduce the number of economically unviable calves through responsible breeding strategies by using breeding tools and techniques such as sex semen. And the next part of the strategy on the next slide should cover the management of calves, and there are existing standards within Red Tractor that cover the care of young stock regardless of gender. The policy should include the provisions of rearing facilities and the identified market for the breed of calf produced. We're not asking for additional buildings to be built, rather making use of space that's already available at farm. So the no number of pens, hutch spaces is available for the determined number, not that it is always set up. Next slide, please. So there are some templates and guidance on preparing the breeding and management policy, and these are available on the Red Tractor website. So on the slide, it just shows you some of the elements that are covered within the breeding and management plan and how you can calculate the space allocation required. Next slide, please. So for the small number of members this affects, there are some challenges, including smaller stature cows and spring calvers. Therefore, some of the longer term breeding decisions may be to look at the size of the cow which is being bred on the farm and if this will produce a calf that the market requires. TB, it is accepted across the industry that TB could potentially be a problem with increased numbers of animals being retained on farm. It is important that the industry continues to communicate so that informed decisions can be made. Next slide, please. And there are other standards for consideration. Next slide, please. And this is just the wider elements of Red Tractor here. So are staff looking after the calves competent and able to identify issues early? Is the care of young stock covered in the emergency plan if the person of primary responsibility is off work? And do they know the protocols for feeding, etc.? Is housing suitable, being well ventilated and lit, and our pens well bedded so calves can remain within their zone of thermal comfort? And then lastly, have you considered biosecurity of calves and any vaccination programmes, and are staff aware of the first signs of disease, illness? And all these elements together can save time and money in the long run. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to the next speaker. Thank you.
My slide isn't changing, so I'm not quite sure whether it is up or not, but can you see me at the moment? Sorry for that.
Can see you. Can you see the first slide of sex semen survey?
No, not at the moment. It's not changing on my screen, but it may be at my end at the moment. So I'll continue talking. If I get stuck on the slides, I think I can recall which ones I'm going to be seeing. So you can
always follow them along. If you want to follow them along your end, and then just tell me when you're skipping ahead, I can match that. So whatever you can give that a go. Otherwise, we can always come back to you. But we'll try it now if you want.
Okay, it's just changed for me, so that's perfect. Good, thank you. Okay, sorry for that technical hiccup on my side. So just to introduce myself, I'm Marco Winters. I'm head of animal genetics at AHDB, and my responsibility is to look after the genetic and genomic evaluation that we publish in the UK for dairy cattle. I've just got a couple of slides just to give you an overview of a survey that we've been conducting at AHDB for the last 10 years now to look at the numbers of sex semen that's being used in the industry. So as a country, we started, well, we were the first in the world to start using sex semen in the dairy industry, and it has been available for about 20 years now. So it's no longer a new technology, but what we were really interested in is saying, well, is the uptake of sex semen increasing over time? Because there wasn't any national statistic that benchmarked it or even captured that type of data. So what we've been doing for the last 10 years is do an annual survey of all the major dairy breeding companies. So it's specifically focusing on dairy semen. And this slide shows you the list of breeding companies that participated in the 2021 survey. So it runs from April to April. So the next one is due in a couple of months' time, just to get the latest 2022 figures. And I just want to send a big thank you to the breeding companies who do participate, because they provide us with their annual semen sales and break it down by breed, and then specifically the numbers of sexed versus conventional semen. And based on that data, obviously, we can have a good idea of what is happening in the industry and the impact that can have on dairy bull calves, which for this forum is a non-obvious interest. So next slide, please. So the review indicates, and I guess it's no news to the industry, we know that sex semen is definitely increasing, but what is really telling is how dramatically that has changed over the last 2 or 3 years. It's very evident that the industry is, well, confident that the product works. I think it's been around for long enough now that a lot of farmers have had experience using it on young stock initially, but also more and more we see it being used on milking cows, where it can also work with the right management. And so what we are seeing now is that when we split down the dairy semen on farm, 63.5%, so close to 64% of all semen, of all dairy semen being used on farm is now sexed. And that obviously is great news, because it does mean that we can be more selective in which cows we're breeding from, so only breed from the very best, but also reduce the numbers of bull calves that may not find a home subsequently. As a consequence, when we then look at the breakdown between beef and dairy on the next slide, we can also then see that as a consequence of being more selective on the dairy cows that we're breeding with dairy sex semen, we can obviously increase the uses of beef semen. And beef semen tends to be mostly conventional. There's very little sex semen being used in the beef side. There is some interest, but it's certainly by no means very large as yet. But the good news is, again, is because of that beef semen usage that we got a better return, obviously, on the calf crop that's being born on the farm, but also reduces the number of dairy calves or dairy bull calves that may not find a market. And later on, Duncan will explain the impact that we're seeing when we look at the national statistics on those. So it's a very positive shift and a very clear shift, which, again, anecdotally, from talking to the breeding companies, we expect that number to increase from the current 64%, and probably the review that we'll do in 22 will show again that there's another further shift in the uses of sex semen and a further increase in the use of beef semen on the dairy herds. So the next slide then just gives you a bit of a breakdown what we see in uses of different breeds, and here is just split down between Holstein, which remains by far the dominant breed in the industry, versus the non-Holstein breeds. And the reason for just putting this up is that, well, there is some awareness, at least, of the size of cows and the impact it has on the calf that comes out of it, and really to illustrate that there has been a little bit of a shift, but by no means we're seeing a big shift towards other breeds for that purpose. So when we talk about improving calf quality within the dairy herds, we've got to think about the various breeds that are available. And the next slide just gives you a breakdown then of the specific non-Holstein breeds. So these are the other breeds that are captured there in the previous slide. And you can see that actually those are pretty static over time. There's a little bit of movement, but it's based on smaller numbers, so it's not surprising maybe that it's not as linear as you would expect with Holsteins. But anyway, it does indicate there's not a major shift from one breed to the other. But also it does highlight that there are opportunities for farmers who do want to look at other breeds to improve calf quality. They can find breeds that can do that, and well, the British Friesian would be an obvious example, but also Montbéliard's Flexfeed, which we know can produce a better calf at the end of the day if you are interested in that. But rather than just thinking about within or across breed differences, we also are aware that there are within breed variation, and that within breed variation in terms of calf quality, or in our case, carcass quality, can be significant. And the next slide is just to wrap up, I guess, my section, is that for those of you who are interested in improving the carcass quality of your dairy cows, we have got a dairy carcass index, and it's a within breed index, but it does highlight which of the bulls can produce a better carcass compared to others. And that is done within breed. So within the Holstein breeds, you can find those bulls that are going to give you a better carcass at the end of its life. And similarly, within the Jerseys or Ayrshire's or Friesians, you can find those bulls that are going to give you that improvement. That's based on slaughter data in the UK. It's based on prime cattle. So it's not necessarily looking at veal or cow cow value, but it is targeting the prime slaughter age, which, when we're thinking about bull calves that are leaving the farm, they would fall into that category ultimately. And alongside the dairy carcass index, there's, through our partners Beef and Lamb, we also produce a national beef evaluation. It's based on exactly the same slaughter data that we collect through abattoirs, but obviously then geared towards the beef bulls who have got progeny in the slaughter data. And a thank goes out also to the abattoirs who provide us with that data to enable us to do the evaluation. And with that, it's just a summary of what I want to do, and I'll pass over to Duncan, who will now give you the impacts on the animals coming through in the national statistics. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Duncan Wyatt. I work as an analyst in AHDB, looking at red meat markets and livestock too. So next slide then, please, Christian. Thank you very much. This is a slide showing the breakdown of calf registrations and births, well, births actually, in fact, from the dairy herd. What I'm going to do is use the period from 2017 to 2019 as a kind of a reference period, as a bit of a kind of a base period, if you like, to make my comparisons with. The reason why I've done that is because I don't have full data for 2021. I only have data going up to September. And so what I'm going to do is compare the 12 months up to September 2021, if you like, which obviously is a little bit of 2020, with this base period. So I didn't want to kind of double dip into 2020. So apologies for the confusing introduction, but that's the base period. So it's the latest 12 months versus this kind of 3-year average is what I'm going to be comparing with. So what you can see here is out of the GB breeding herd, we had about an estimated 1.44 million births in this reference period, of which, as you can see, the distribution there of dairy heifers, dairy bulls, and then beef animals on the right-hand side. And what we've seen, if you compare the latest set of data to this, what you'll have seen is where we've had over 300,000 registrations of dairy males to the dairy herd in this reference period, in the last kind of 12 months, with that's gone down to just over 200,000. So what we're seeing is, based on the information that Marco's just showed you, more sex semen being used in the dairy herd. What that means is we just have fewer dairy bulls being registered in the first place, and of those dairy bulls, more of them we think are making it to market, and there's definitely evidence in the data to suggest that the number of calves being euthanized on the farm is less. And the reason why I say that is because where we've got 1.44 million births estimated here, in the latest 12 months period, we actually have 1.44 million registrations. And so what that suggests is the number of euthanized calves has actually declined over that time quite dramatically. And where here we have about 630,000 beef animals coming out of the dairy herd in the latest 12 months, we have, of those same 1.44 million registrations, we have over 700,000 beef animals coming out of the herd now. So what we're seeing again is that data that Marco's just showed us. Not only are we seeing an impact of the sex semen on registrations, but also seeing an impact of those remaining dairy females having beef semen used, and an increase in the number of beef animals coming out of the dairy herd as well. So all good news. So next slide then, please. Obviously, we can see this is a chart showing historic prices for 3 categories of animal: rearing bull prices. And what we can see is, historically there was obviously a very low value to the Holstein Friesian male cross calves coming out of the dairy herd, and much more value in beef types coming out of the dairy herd as well. And as you can see, during that 2019 period, prices dropping off quite severely, and that's kind of in line with the overall value coming out of the beef market, lower finished prices generally feeding back through to rearing calf prices. And again, in the most recent data over the last couple of years, you can see that recovery generally in the price of finished beef feeding through to the recovery in the price of store animals and feeding back through again to the price of rearing bull calves as well. Obviously, you know, the Hereford crosses and the Continental crosses much more potentially connected to that finishing market, and so those prices do move more in line with finished prices, whereas the Holstein Friesian price is just generally lower and probably less connected to that finished market. So you can see, even when times are good, should I say, you don't necessarily see the value coming back into that category of bull calf. Next slide then, please. So this next chart just shows registrations over that time, and as I've mentioned already, you know, in terms of dairy males, we've gone from registering more than 300,000 dairy males in that 17 to 19 reference period to registering just over 200,000 dairy males in that time. So not only is the market adjusting in as much as it's producing fewer dairy males and more beef animals over the period. So again, just as a reference period, we're saying by comparison, we're producing 87,000 fewer dairy males out of the same number of registrations, more or less, and we're producing an extra 80,000+ beef animals out of the same number of registrations. So we're seeing that shift in the market. So not only are we producing fewer dairy males in the first place, but more of them are being registered, and more of them are being taken to greater ages. So next slide then, please. So we've been talking about registration so far. What this slide shows you is the change in the number of dairy male animals that are making it, that were going to abattoirs at younger ages. And what we can see is in the periods 2020 versus 2019, so I'm not talking about the reference period now, these are just year to date, so you can see the separate months. We've got data up until November. You can see that in that reference period 2021 versus 2020, we have 33% fewer dairy male animals going to abattoirs at quite young ages, and that number's dropped by a half compared to 2019. So really kind of some three kind of really good news stories. One is there's evidence to suggest that there are fewer dairy males being euthanized on farm. Two, there are there's strong evidence to suggest there are fewer dairy males being born per every registration. And what I mean by that is we're having beef animals being born instead of dairy males. And then thirdly, of the dairy males that are being born, as I mentioned, we're seeing fewer of them euthanized, but we're also seeing fewer of them coming to abattoirs at younger ages as well. So hopefully you'll agree that I certainly see that as a really positive picture and a really positive outcomes from the changes that have been taking place in recent months in the industry. Yeah, long may it continue as far as I'm concerned. So with that, I would like to hand over to Chris Dodds from the LAA. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Duncan. Good afternoon, everyone. In case you don't know who I am, I'm Chris Dodds. I'm the Managing Director and Executive Secretary for the Livestock Auctioneers Association. We represent all livestock markets in England and Wales. Next slide, please. So, yeah, the whole concept of the scheme that's been working through for the last period of time is trying to maximise value of calves that people put in the marketplace. And of course, I am going to say, and I'm quite rightly to do so, that the auction mart is by far the largest natural cooperative available to farmers. But where the advantage is that there are a mixture of buyers looking for different types of animals. What we have seen over the last 12-15 months is quite a lot of calves being brought into the market that would have usually been euthanized, and these haven't always been easy to find buyers for, although there are things that have helped, which is great, and I'll come on to those in a minute. We do and continue to, and will always continue to say that our marketplace can handle any breed of any quality as long as it's healthy and in a fit condition and has had all the supplements it needs before it comes to the market. Next slide, please. What we need to see in the livestock market is calves being presented that have had the right start. In other words, they've had the colostrum that they need. That the calves come and the use of good genetics is really important and becoming more so now, which enables the calf to have better stature and strength, which is what the buyer is generally looking for. We need good husbandry. We need the calves to have been well looked after and therefore presented in the right way, in the right condition. We need the age of the calf is quite important, and I'll show you a slide in a minute that very clearly shows that just by keeping a calf a relatively short period of time dramatically increases and improves the price that's obtainable. And the calves need to be clean and ready for market, so they need to be sent to the market in a fit state so that the buyers around the ring are attracted to them. What's important as well is health status of calves, and we've seen a drive for BVD and euthanised and other endemic diseases, and we will see a greater benefit from farmers being in these schemes once more animals become members of it. It's unfortunately a little bit like cat and mouse, where you know, if you have 150 calves and you've only 5 or 6 that have been BVD tested, the opportunity for a buyer looking for 20 or 30 calves for them to only buy BVD free is quite difficult. So we would encourage farmers to join schemes like this and to present calves with their health details at the time of sale. Of course, the Livestock Information Programme will help that as it's rolled out and comes to fruition, where all of that sort of data, subject to the owner of the calves giving their permission, will be available for us as auctioneers to extract out of the national database. When I talk about good genetics, I'm also talking about sire ID and dam type. They're the 2 main questions. Buyers around the ring can assess the quality of a calf visually very easily, but it is also beneficial to know sire ID, name sire, and it's also important to understand the type of cow that the calves have come from. Next slide, please. We as an industry don't believe that calves should be seen by the dairy industry as a byproduct. And this can be highlighted very easily by looking at flying herds, and not ideal for everyone, in that a lot of people nowadays like to have a close herd, but actually they're quite a good indicator in value. And a lot of flying herds will tell us that if they're using the right type of cow and they're using a bull semen, a beef semen, sorry, and they're selling their calves at between 3 and 10 weeks old, and that heifer, that cow has more than 1 calf, so it has 3 or 4 calves, that the calf value added to the cull cow value goes an awful long way, if not totally, paying for the replacement animal coming into the herd. So they are a valuable asset to any herd if the calf produced can be done so in a way that gains a realistic statistical value. Next slide, please. So I'm looking here at maximizing values. I've taken a handful of our member markets, not in any geographical area specifically, and only a handful of them in building this data. But I think what it shows you very clearly here is that you'll see the dairy side bull calves in a grey colour. Hopefully you've all got a colour screen. The beef side heifer calves in a pale green, and the beef side bull calves in a dark green. This shows you here the value of the calves and how they step up if they're kept a short period of time on the farm. So, you know, farmers could possibly look at saying, well, I normally sell my cows at 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Is it financially viable for me to aim to look at keeping them for 6, 8 weeks, or even 12 weeks, which some people do? Because if you look at the black and white bull calves, at less than 2 weeks old, they have a fairly minimal value. Whereas if you go up to somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks, you're looking at an average price of £100. Of course, those more Frisian type bull calves, that 8 to 12 weeks, can be easily over the £200 market. So it's important to have a look at those. Next slide, please. What I thought it'd be helpful for you to look at was market average prices, and it's interesting here because we've moved on to more, as was being highlighted just before, more sex semen being used. So in 2016, our members, the LAA members, sold 223,000 calves, and they have an overall average of £196. Then in 2017, we sold just over 220,000 to have an average of 222. Then in 2018, we sold 225,000 to average 185. And then in 2019, we sold 222,000 to average 163. And most of our members, especially in the endemic TB areas and in the southwest, where we have more New Zealand style farming practices, that a lot of the farmers down there that were possibly euthanizing calves have started selling them in the markets, and the 2020 average has risen up slightly, but that was the start in 2019 of those calves coming in and us getting an awful lot of the smaller bodied calves out of the New Zealand style cow that were bred with dairy bulls, and it drew the averages back. In 2020 we saw an average of £198. So we've seen them lift up a bit, and that's because more people are using sex semen and there's more continental bull calves coming on the market compared to dairy bull calves. One thing that I would say, that as auctioneers we've worked very hard with APHA and DEFRA to develop, and Welsh Government to develop, orange markets, which we have now got established for hopefully for more calves to go into. Historically, once an animal went into an orange market, TB restricted cattle went into an orange market, they could be bought, they go into an LFU, a licensed unit, and they couldn't come out of that unit until they went to slaughter. We've now got an acceptance of an awful lot of people that buy calves don't normally intend to keep those calves for their entire life until slaughter, so they were less keen to buy restricted animals. Now they're allowing us to move animals from an orange market into a licensed unit, and then back into an orange market to go to another licensed unit, which hopefully through time will help us to increase market availability and gain best possible price for them. So that's a very quick run round from myself as the auctioneers, and be delighted to take some questions later on when we get to that. But on behalf of the LAA, thank you very much, and I'll pass on now to the working group member updates. Thank you.
Hi there, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Just a quick apology to start with. If I do dip in and out, I might have to pop onto my phone, so I've got that set up. Technology's not working here well today. Just a quick introduction. So I'm Phoebe Russell, I'm the NFU Dairy Advisor, and I help lead on this work from an NFU perspective. So I'm going to give you an update on the downstream working group, which is kind of farmer focused, and Ellen's then going to take over from me. She's also from the NFU working in TB policy, and she's going to give an update on the TB work stream, and then Nick from AHDB will follow up on the upstream working group. So next slide, please. Oh, that's just an intro one. I can go again. Thank you. So as I said, the downstream working group is essentially covering the priority areas of rearing all calves with care, with a big focus on the genetic and management kind of improvements we can make. So essentially we want to arm farmers with the tools, knowledge and resources to sort of make these changes and move forward positively. As you can see, there's lots of various stakeholders involved, and I mean, I stress it now that the collaboration between all of the stakeholders, so from farmers through to all the different kinds of integrators or the Livestock Auctioneers Association, as you've just heard from Chris, others in the supply chain, as well as retailers and processors. This united approach has really sort of driven this work, and you might have seen that through the logo we've created to try and show a bit of unity through that too. Could you please move on? A prominent group that we've been working with is one that Gwyn does a lot of work on, Gwyn Jones, who you'll hear from later. It's the Ruminant Health and Welfare Group. So in Wales, essentially leading on lots of different health and welfare elements, but they're very similarly aligned to ourselves and wanting to focus on the same priority areas as the calf strategy. So their support on this has really sort of driven the work forward with their engagement with Welsh Government and others, their communications, and we hope that they will have more opportunity to host a visit that they plan prior to Christmas. They do a lot on the challenges for spring calvers, so it's sort of something they prominently lead on. Again, may hear more from Gwyn on that shortly. We do meet around once a month, so with all these stakeholder groups, everybody is very focused on the different areas and has actions to bring forward to each meeting, so sort of a very collaborative group. And what we really enjoy is the farmer involvement, so we've got dairy and beef farmer representatives, which really makes a difference and adds the reality to the topic. You might have been involved in our webinar sort of this time last year. It was sort of red tractor focused as the new standard was being implemented, as Gemma's spoken about. So it's good to recap this year to sort of see how the work's progressed, and essentially a lot of this downstream work supports farmers in being compliant towards the standard, as well as a lot of supermarket standards. We know that was sort of the early days of why the calf strategy was set up in the first place, to support farmers through the changes that were being sort of imposed. You might have accessed the Q&A document that we host on the NFU and HDB pages, and it is regularly updated. And it's essentially sort of seeks to be a sort of a one-stop shop for everything everyone asks us, and sort of commonly asked questions that cover all different elements, including TB, including other ways to market genetics. So I'd suggest once we send around the links towards the end of the after the call, please do take a look. If there's any other questions in there that you sort of haven't got answered, please do ask us to include and look to address, because we want to keep the document really live. This document will soon be accompanied by a directory, so it's a piece of work we've been working on quite recently, and it's essentially to link calf rearers and any marketing opportunities for them, and how to sell calves into any opportunity there is out there, because it can be perhaps overwhelming when you sort of gotten used to a certain way of doing things, and there's lots of other opportunities that are yet to be explored. So we've had a lot of input from, again, Chris, other integrators, people with calf collection units, and also the various TB options for those with calves who are shut down on TB restricted farms. So again, the link will be shared to that shortly, and we'd really appreciate any feedback and thoughts you've got on that. Again, we are very aware there's lots of different farmers with lots of different systems within the dairy industry, and within systems there are, again, more refined systems themselves, so we know everyone's different, but we've got the middle 50% we like to focus on, as well as the sort of those more pressing challenges or more difficult situations. So Ellen will touch on those farmers that struggle with TB and shutdowns, and how to move calves off farm and manage calves in these situations. Equally, we've got those people that might struggle with a small stature animal or spring calving and a TB challenge at the same time. So we appreciate how difficult this can be to meet a red tractor standard or otherwise. So this work is really focused on supporting these people and animals through. Essentially for the small stature animal, we are looking at how weight can be added. So for example, 30 to 50 kilos to a small stature animal. We are very aware that many people are struggling to make a margin on these animals, even when bred with a beef animal or crossed. We're not seeing the value, and in turn people are struggling to meet supermarket specifications. This again limits options, so we really are all about growing options for our farmers and sort of always exploring the opportunities out there. You can also see on the slide supporting dairy industry initiatives. So we work quite closely with a lot of academic and research institutions, universities and others that are sort of very live on the topic. So we're sort of always in touch with the people that are at the forefront of research and big concepts. So that's really positive and quite exciting. You'll see there as well Abby Reader, so Welsh Dairy Board Chair. She spends a lot of time with us, giving us some great ideas from the grassroots level up, and she's had lots of different ideas on how to sort of engage farmers and bring farmers together, benchmark and really build on this collaboration kind of effort that we know has worked so well so far. I will quickly just touch, without going over time, just on the calf week, which Nick has mentioned, and I'll allow him to elaborate a little more, but it launches on the 2nd of February, and we're sort of really proud that it's going to be a celebration and legacy event that builds and grows bigger each year. But in short, it's really just to sort of highlight all of the good work that the whole industry is doing towards meeting the goals of this strategy. And yeah, we're sort of quite keen that you engage in the different events we'll be hosting, some physical, some webinars, and other bits and bobs like that. So yeah, really keen that we will send round all the info to you, and please do engage. You being there really makes the difference. So that's all I've got for now. I'll move on to Ellen so she can cover the TB element. But thank you for your time, and I'm glad my internet held up. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Phoebe. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ellen Burra, so I'm from the NFU TB team down in the Southwest, and as a TB advisor in wildlife control. So you may have seen Tom Dracup in this seat before, so I am actually stepping in for him today. So hopefully from your meeting back in September, you will remember the key focus areas that were talked about last time, but I will just provide a quick update on what that one was. So next slide, please. Thank you. So our main key ask, as Gemma touched on at the beginning and also Phoebe touched on, is to increase the number of biosecure routes available for farmers shut down with TB. So there are different types of TB license units depending if you're within the high risk area, edge area or low risk area. So you've got AFUs, you've got AFU enhanced, you've got license finishing units and also TB isolation units as well, allowing you to be able to create that robust supply chain right from the beginning to the end. Next slide, please. So the three focused areas that I believe were talked about last time, firstly communication. So industry were asked to increase and promote different case studies, different information documents, different articles and also articles online to promote different types of TB license units, of which myself and my colleague Hannah Stanbury are working on within the NFU. We've hosted various visits to different AFUs as well, sort of trying to increase member knowledge and member perception of these units and how they could elaborate their own businesses. In terms of policy, so as would have been talked about last time, industry and government, we've been asked to look at different scenarios. So for example, extending the TB testing requirement for going into a type TB isolation unit from 30 days, increasing that up to 60 days. And for example, in AFUs, trying to remove the pre-movement test between rearing AFUs and finishing AFUs. And then in terms of delivery, basically trying to ensure a consistent approach in terms of licensing from APHA, whether that be on farm or when you're actually coming to granting the license, but also trying to provide that long-term confidence to farmers that the policy won't consistently change, so they have confidence when applying for a TB license unit, whether that be one of the 3 or 4 different type of ones. Next slide, please. So to sort of update on what has actually happened since your previous meeting. So back in October, Tom Dracup, he organised with the other stakeholders, organised to come together at Butelaar's AFU farm down in the southwest, down in Somerset, and it was absolutely great, as you had English and Welsh government, farmers, APHA and AHDB all around the table at that meeting, and as Phoebe touched on previously, Tom just asked me to really thank everybody for coming to that meeting, as it was a huge success and step forward in terms of collaborating with all the different stakeholders. But firstly, as you're probably all aware, AI, so avian influenza, is currently presenting its challenges. So as we haven't actually moved as forward as quickly as we would have liked, but as you are all aware and hopefully understand, we are extremely committed to make sure that the following asks are pushed forward as soon as there is the resource to do so. So in terms of communication, firstly, as you're probably all aware, there's no quick and easy process of linking a restricted farm to a TB license unit. Obviously, we have online, there's the AFU spreadsheet of different AFUs, but there's obviously no information document for TB license units if that's something a farmer wanted to explore. So it was better discussed how we could link up these producers and farms under restriction, and we asked DEFRA to have a look to see if they could source any information that they have already. They currently don't have any, but moving forwards, APHA are going to be asking their applicants to share details on the age and the weight of animals that they will be sourcing when new licenses are granted. And also a big win is that also DEFRA and the Welsh Government have approved the development of the AFU Finder. So this will be launched onto the IBTB website, and this should be really useful, and all being well, this should be available in the late spring. So in terms of policy, so obviously at the moment all calves under 42 days don't have to be pre-movement tested when moved off farm. However, we are calling on and want to work with government on extending the 42-day age exemption. So especially for entries into AFUs, as this will enable a much quicker and smoother transition off farm. Besides this, as I said earlier, we're also looking into removing the pre-movement test between the rearing AFU and finishing AFU, allowing for a much quicker transition through the supply chain and enabling it to be sort of a much more of a smoother pipeline. In terms of movement licensing, so we're calling on government to simplify this process, as I'm quite sure all of you have had certain issues when it comes to movement licensing, getting licenses on time. So there's a huge call to simplify this process and especially be more consistent between England and Wales, with the potential of granting a general license to a farm, to a holding, as opposed to the standard individual license for each animal which currently stands. And finally, just to finish off on TB isolation units, so obviously TB isolation units, after 2 clear skin tests at the moment, animals can be sold as officially TB free, but at the moment they can only source from 1 single farm. And obviously in certain cases this isn't practical for farmers, and we are really working with government to be able to source from multiple holdings. And also, whilst on TB isolation units, as I said at the beginning, obviously when you're moving a cattle into a TB isolation unit, they must have had a negative TB test within 30 days prior to moving. But we realise this is very unhelpful for farmers, and DEFRA also recognise this as well. So we're all being well, pushing it towards moving this to 60 days. So hopefully that will make it much easier for farmers to move across, but we are just determining when this is likely to happen. So that is it from me. So just to conclude there, the stakeholders and the attendees from the meeting back at the Butelau farm in Somerset are again meeting on the 1st of February. So the group are going to come back together and update each other on the progress and be able to move those asks forward. So we will be keeping you updated as soon as we can on the back of that meeting. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Ellen, and thank you, everyone. Nicely keeping to time and hopefully giving a good impression of where we are. We are getting some questions in, and I shall try and answer one of those as I go through my short piece. But as it is, I would encourage those who are on the call to ask any other questions. Following Gwyn's piece, following me, we will look to answer some of the questions that have come in. Thanks very much. And so, next slide, if I may. So I'm covering the upstream work, and that's the beef supply chain engagement. And I think of the number of priorities that the calf strategy set up at the beginning, the cooperation between the beef supply industry and dairy farming, understanding the needs and the targets and expectations of the beef industry, I think has been an important part and one of the priorities, along with recognising that development of new markets for dairy beef. So I think that's been part of the focus. The working group, again, a number of people who are already involved in the downstream, the farmer end, but also including the likes of the British meat industry, Butelau Group, and again, important to have farmers there and recognising some of the restrictions that we have. We've got across country representation, NFU Cymru, QMS, AIMS also supporting the smaller meat suppliers. So it's a very diverse group, but also a very useful group to call upon the experience that we've got there. Thank you, Christian. So the activity up to now, we've been sharing industry knowledge, as I've just alluded to avoid dead ends, and I think that's as important, not to go down rabbit holes as would be described, and looking at areas, and that's certainly been the case where we've avoided heading down ideas and thoughts that we've already been examined and checked out and recognised that they're not going to add value to what we're trying to supply. So also managing the expectations of the industry participants and stakeholders within the wider stakeholder group. And I didn't allude to it earlier, but as an industry, there are over 60 different stakeholders who are signed up and signatories to the calf strategy. So managing the expectations right the way through from retail, government, and other stakeholders throughout has been an important part of the work that we do. Phoebe alluded to it earlier, and recognising the challenges of small stature cow breeding, which has come through the block calving, primarily block calving routes, and trying to deal with those issues. And Phoebe alluded to that earlier with regards to the size of these small stature cows and the potential to try and help the beef industry be able to add value and be able to justify buying those calves at the start. We need to address the size of those cows, those dams who are producing those calves. So even with a continental cross, it was still leaving the industry a challenge to meet specifications of retailers and so forth and their markets. So there's an important area there which is added to the discussion and continues to try and be promoted to encourage farmers to think about that whole supply chain as well as their own business. Challenging the misconceptions and historic issues, dairy beef, certainly within food service and industry, and there's been a question in the chat with regards to this and how much engagement we've been doing. Now, What we found was there was a preconceived idea that once we started talking about dairy beef, we're talking about cull cows. So that's been an important part of the work and continues to be an important part of the work going forward to ensure that the food industry, food service, and the wider industry recognises the importance and the improving quality of dairy beef with those crosses that Marco was referring to earlier. And that's an ongoing piece of work that we continue to focus on. Calling out the environmental, it would be a shame to get through a webinar without mentioning the E word and sustainable credentials of dairy beef, and that's recognising that it's significantly better than the imported product with regards to its carbon footprint, leaving some of that carbon footprint behind on the dairy farm. So important that we call that out. There is significant interest, as you can imagine, with regards to the buyers, food service especially, but also across retail in the interest of dairy beef because of that ability to influence their own carbon footprints and effects on that. So that's a good hook that we can use for dairy beef and continue to try and monopolise on. Encouraging the knowledge sharing through the upstream group is an important part of it. Data sharing where possible and helping to understand what we can do. The testing or tasting and sampling is something that we're looking at doing with some of the processors, and to be able to open up that market potential and the opportunities that that can give again against people who've maybe shied away from the variability of dairy beef in the past. So that's a continued piece of work that we look to do using the experience of the AHDB team, who talk to all the wider food service and industry processors and so forth. So that's a part that we've been playing a strong game at. And then Phoebe also alluded to the actual design of the calf strategy emblem or logo to try and give a consistent message across, and we'll come to that as we are coming into Calf Week. Thank you. So some of the areas which have been touched on already, the importance for the industry to recognise that the health of the calf is paramount. And we'd ask you all to support the Colostrum is Gold campaign, which has been running for a number of years, focusing a lot more on the beef industry than the dairy industry. So it's something that the dairy industry can adopt and ensure that all calves are given that first chance of colostrum feeding, and the importance of that, and recognising the best start and build of that productive future. And I think that's so key for the beef industry, and a lot more work is going into, I know certainly through the integrators and so forth, looking at that colostrum status of calves and the importance of that, and trying to get that through to the dairy industry. So I certainly encourage you to pick up on the activity through February that will go on, which will coincide with the start of Calf Week. Thank you, Christian. So Calf Week, it's the inaugural week that we have planned, and Phoebe's put a massive amount of work in trying to set this up, along with a number of other stakeholders that we are using to develop the idea. We recognise that this year we were planning on launching at Dairy Tech, and that was the reason to go for the February date. So it's the 2nd through to the 9th of February. Now, with Dairy Tech being postponed through to April, we have juggled things around a bit, and I'll come on to the agenda of that week in a moment or two. So we'll be looking at activity both through webinars to give national coverage, podcasts and videos that will be supporting some social media work that we'll do, but also live farm activity. So it will give, hopefully, the majority of people the chance to engage with it. And I would encourage all that are on the call today to engage with the activities in some way, either via the webinars that we'll be hosting or through the live activity. There's less live activity this year because of that cancellation and of Dairy Tech, but also of Agri-Scott that we were finishing at, and that was going to be the finale piece. But as it is, we will deliver the week as we can this year, but look to it for it to be a legacy for following years of the calf strategy itself, and continue to focus on health and the importance of health and the management and sustainability of the dairy beef supply chain. So if you go to the NFU or the AHDB website in the next day or so, we will have the running order up, and we'll also try and include the links and so forth for you in the follow-up email that will be within this following this webinar. So activity-wise, on the 2nd, we've got a webinar which will also be the launch. That will be Adam Butelaar's business reflecting on. They were going to have a live meeting at the AFU unit that Ellen touched on. We've now stepped back from that because of the COVID issues that were coming and the time that it takes to organise these things, that we decided that we would go to a webinar to try and control the risk to people visiting, but also to widen out the opportunity that we have to share across a wider part of the country. So that will be some presentations around good health and management, and focusing on the way that they would ordinarily have done that in a live setup, but actually just trying to move as we would have moved groups around. We will look to present through that. And on the following day, we've got a VOLAC supported webinar around the sustainability and efficient calf rearing, and so that will be hosted at the lunchtime. There's also further activity on the 3rd, along with the 4th. On the Friday, we've got a monitor farm, one of the AHDB beef monitor farm visits over in Tenbury Wells in Herefordshire, and that will be focusing on a dairy beef finishing unit, rearing and finishing unit at there. So there'll be a link to be able to sign up for that, and there is at the present time on the AHDB website. And then going into the following week, we'll be launching videos, and we've got further podcast and webinar activity into the following week. So we'll share that running order with everybody in the next day or so, and we hope that you can give us the support and publicise the activity for those stakeholders who are on the call today, but also for farmers. If you're in the right area, obviously we'd encourage you to sign up to the physical meetings, but if not, then certainly please join the webinars and other activity, and promote where possible. Thank you very much. So I think I'm passing over to Gwyn. Yes, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I only have one slide. I'm going to just go through the industry asks, really. And I'm Gwyn Jones. I farm in Sussex. I've been involved in this from the beginning, and I think the first thing I want to do is congratulate the industry on what's been achieved in a relatively short space of time. Yet again, an example of industry, the agricultural industry, taking responsibility and improving things, which is great to see. And looking at the top asks, if you like, for the industry in this next 12 months, we've got 12 months to go with this. Continue to support the calf strategy to eliminate the practice of euthanasia on calves. That's the obvious one. That's what we've been doing with a tremendous amount of success, as you've just heard from the other speakers. And then continuing to review breeding decisions. We've seen what's happening with sex semen. I suspect that'll continue. And then with beef semen, probably that's the next step for most farmers in maybe looking at the better genetics for beef crosses. And then consider in the TB high risk areas, what breeds and what types of calves to produce there. Because obviously, if a farmer is in danger of going down with TB, those calves will be reared indoors. And that probably means that native breeds are not the best for that system. That's obviously a very personal decision, but it's something to consider in high risk areas. Looking at the crossbred cow, especially the small stature crossbred cow, quite a bit's been said about this already, just to remind everybody that we're probably looking at something like a 30 to 50 kilogram increase in size to enable that crossbred cow to produce a calf that is suitable for the beef industry. We do believe that at that sort of weight and above, obviously above is even easier, these crossbred cows can, with really good beef genetics, produce animals that are acceptable for the beef industry. And then the option for calf outlets, that's an important one. We've been doing quite a bit of work in Wales. We recognise that there's a shortage of calf rearers, and we believe that there are opportunities for people to come into farming, maybe calf rearing, and also opportunities for others who are not currently calf rearing to maybe do so if they have some labour to spare or some facilities, a properly ventilated shed, for example, that can be put to good use. And then looking at the position of British beef, as Nick has said, you know, this is high welfare, high quality, low carbon beef. And if you ever wanted to displace import, this is a very good product to be doing it with, because we also know that very often in blind tastes, dairy beef comes out very high, both in taste and texture. Actually, it's a very good product. And I think in the past, we've probably undervalued that and not sold it as well as we might. But certainly from the environmental side, there's real interest in this now, and we should capitalize on that. On TB, again, bottlenecks, NFU are obviously working very hard on this in both England and Wales. And we've seen Welsh Government, for example, moving to not requiring that test when rearing AFUs, move calves onto finishing AFUs, which makes perfect sense because those calves don't go out. We've yet to see DEFRA follow suit on that. And frankly, you know, that's something that should happen sooner rather than later. And there is more that both governments can do to make it easier for farms and farmers down with TB to move those animals, especially when you consider the difficulty sometimes with the administrative side of that. So we need to keep the pressure on there. And then quickly, just to ask you to support the campaigns, obviously. Shout about the sire and Colostrum is gold. The activity around the calf week that Nick's just spoken about. Social media, of course, a big player these days in these events. Red Tractor, you heard from Red Tractor at the beginning, leading on the issue and building and supporting the understanding of that with farmers, I think is important. And then for the industry to share data and have a pre-competitive collaboration within the beef industry on this. So thank you very much indeed, and I'll hand you over to Rebecca now, and we'll answer any questions you have.
Thanks, Gwyn, and thank you to all the speakers. We've got some good questions coming through, and some time for a few more if you've got any pressing questions. So I'll just kick off from start. I'll maybe go to Marco first, if that's okay. So why haven't you differentiated between the dairy breeds, for example, British Friesians, who never have to euthanize?
Okay, so on my slide, when I talked about sex semen usage, I gave a general overview of the usage of semen across the breeds and within the breeds. When we look at the sex semen usage, we tend to find that Holsteins are using more sex semen than some of the smaller populations. Some of that is to do just with which bull studs have got the bulls available to be sexed, and because of the bulls that are available, it tends to be that the Holsteins is more dominant. But certainly, sex semen is available in all breeds to do it. When it comes to well, the quality of the calf, obviously breed has got an effect, and I did mention it, that there are different breeds like British Friesian, Montbéliard, Fleckvieh, who probably have a better outlet than the Holsteins in general. But I think it is important to recognize that even within the Holstein breed, there's a lot of variation. And I do believe that there's enough good quality Holstein bulls out there that can produce a good quality calf. So it's just as much about breed differences as within breed differences. And within breeds, we do provide that information for farmers who want to look at it, which is the dairy carcass index, and they can look at individual bulls within the breed to say which of these bulls are going to give me that better carcass quality at the end of their life. So yes, there is a breed differences, but it's important to recognize also within breeds, there's a lot of stuff that farmers can do.
Great, thank you. And another question, Marco, if I could just carry on a little bit, probably follows on from that question is, so who can dairy farmers turn to for breeding strategy and management planning?
I think a lot of the breeding companies will be quite happy to obviously give advice. So do talk to your breeding advisors about the options, but do also seek out what markets are available for you, because certain areas may be looking for different types of calves, and a lot of the well, the calf buyers or markets will be able to give advice, I guess, in that area. At AHDB, we have got information available, but I guess talking to your local context may be more suitable than talking to just a national body.
Great, thank you. Just a comment on the AFUs. So you can see AFUs in your geographical area on IBTB, and they appear as purple squares if you're zoomed in the correct level. And then if you click on the square, you can bring up the details on the AFU in your area. So that might be helpful for some. Regarding small stature cows, I'm not sure who to, I'm not sure, Nick, if you want to start with this one or if we want to move on. So RE calves from small stature cows, do we want larger cows or calves, or is it that more work needs to be done at the other end of the supply chain regarding expectation of carcass specifications?
Yeah, I'll pick it up only on the periphery of the experience or knowledge I have, but recognizing it's something that we can take and continue to discuss within the working group itself as to the specifications. But I think what we do have to recognise is that we can't change specifications overnight. Not that we can either add 30 to 50 kilos to those smaller stature cows. But what we do recognise is that it does currently prove to be a challenge. It has in other countries. I think some experience that's been shared within the working group around Ireland and the challenges that they've had recently over time of their beef industry struggling to be able to use the progeny that are coming out of the block calving herds over there and challenging their beef industry. So I think what we do recognise is that, albeit it's still a relatively small proportion of the dairy herd that is block calving and has gone down this crossbred small New Zealand type cow route, we do need to recognise that what we do want to encourage is those farmers who have gone down that route to recognise that if we don't have euthanasia, which we don't now have as a routine way of dealing with these, that we would encourage them to be thinking about that marketplace beyond their farm gate that they're putting those progeny into, and just think around the fact of whether 30 to 50 kilos is going to make a dramatic difference to their herd and the way that they work, but ultimately will help their supply chain of their calves coming off that farm for the future. So it's a work in progress. We certainly have struggled to pin down the actual figure, and that 470 kilo number that we now use is something that came around in discussion, and I think it's a reasonable place to draw. So I think it's certainly not bringing in those wider breeds, Frisians and so forth, which would sit mid 550 plus. It's very much looking at those herds that have really gone down that extreme route of size of cow for their own reasons, but I think recognising the need to take that on. Chris, have you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. It's interesting because I've just been doing some work over the last 6 months with a couple of chefs in London, and they specifically asked for and have had supplied through some of our auctioneers Jersey cross cull cows. All right, so trying to look at promotion of and the benefits of the cast cow within the food chain, which is very interesting. There's been several programs on the telly over the last couple of years about cull cows and, you know, what's right and what's not right and everything else, and where the flavour is and everything. As far as the calves are concerned, you know, throughout my career, we've seen some very good calves coming onto the market that are a British blue, Belgian blue, or something similar onto the Jersey cross cow to produce quite a reasonable beef animal at the end of it. But it goes down to how long does the farmer keep that calf in order to maximise and have an animal worth money. So I think it's a bit of both. I think we've got to look at the size of the animals, we've got to look at the calf size, structure, stature, and also the cull cow. So it's everything. So it's not, I don't think as an industry we're totally dismissing everything and anything that's not a broad-shouldered, good conformation type animal. It's more about trying to adapt and gain best benefit from what we have to a degree.
I think there's a piece that goes along with that, Chris. Sorry, Rebecca, just to come back on that also is about the sire itself, and making sure that we're calling out the sire, so that there's a lot of work going on in the background with regards to looking at this sire and all the sires and the progeny coming through, and being able to track that through. Now, we can't do that as an industry and help the beef industry to identify what is working on these if we don't use the sire name on the passport. So I think it's so important. We've got a campaign at AHDB around Shout About Sire, and I know, Gwyn, you've been doing some work with identified sires that again can help to deliver the carcass quality that the beef industry is looking at. So I think it's important that we encourage all farmers to continue to consider putting that sire onto the passport and using the right sire to try and help that job.
Great, thank you. And the next question, potentially, Phoebe, NFU question potentially, or you could pass it on. So what work has been done or is planned to address some of the unique challenges for harder to reach communities such as Channel Islands? Oh, has Phoebe frozen?
You might be on mute, Phoebe. We can't hear you currently.
I will probably. My back or not?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah.
It shouldn't be. Okay. I think the first part is clearly engagement, and anyone else who wants to add in on this, feel free. I don't know if it's the red chat as well. Clearly engagement to understand the challenges. Clearly we've noticed that in certain communities, certain practices, whether it's spring flock calving or other things, other breeds are used. So I don't think particularly, and I might be wrong, but clearly we need to try and engage communities that are harder to reach, but equally their challenges they face are probably similar to ones we are already already handling in communities across the different nations. So I think we've already kind of got the groundwork there, and it's just about understanding and definitely not rushing or making anything too difficult for anybody. And of course, continuing with the collaboration efforts, because clearly the market opportunities are limited for those with less access to the mainland or markets. So hopefully that's a bit of an answer. I don't know if anybody else who is probably closer to that wants to add anything.
No, thank you for that.
Okay.
Okay, so the next question is around orange markets. So how many orange markets are listed in England and Wales, and how many of these might be active? If you could take that, Ellen.
So I don't know the exact answer to that question, but that's certainly something I can find out and let you know. Chris, I don't know if you would be able to touch on that at all.
Yeah, thank you. So most of our auctioneers within the edge area and the high risk area, TB wise, have orange market registrations. The question's more about the availability of the marketplace. So I referred before to cat and mouse, and unfortunately with orange markets for calves, that's exactly where we are. You know, we've got to have enough orange markets in operation to get the buyers there to buy, and we've got to have enough buyers to make markets justifiable. So a lot of our members are working very hard with it, and it just needs the support of the farmers and the development of the whole process, to be honest.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm just getting back to where we were. So there was one, I think there's just a few comments, additional comments. So one on using refractometers for colostrum. So they're sort of essential tools, and there is a lot of information on the Colostrum Gold website if you're looking for further information on that. There's a question on, can the industry price report on other breeds from the dairy herd, as Hereford would not represent the majority of beef cross calves? I don't know if you want to pick up that, Duncan.
I think the answer is possibly, and it's something we've looked at in the past. The only problem is with store markets in particular, and again, Chris, you'll be able to help me on this one because it's actually LAA price data that we use, is that the more you kind of narrow down and focus in on particular breeds, the much less reliable the data becomes, because the numbers going through start to drop off quite quickly once you talk about individual animals. So I don't know the history of it, but we settled on that Hereford cross breed just because it was numerous enough for us to be able to bring out what we thought was a meaningful price series from it. But yeah, clearly it's something that we can revisit, but I'm not super hopeful that we'll be able to produce a whole raft of store price series, which will actually mean very much. Yeah, sorry, Chris.
Okay, so thanks, Duncan. Yeah, so the data that AHDB used to produce these stats comes from our member markets, and the breed is one data set that is passed down the line to AHDB, but it is absolutely right. It's a matter of trying to get something that you can make a fair and realistic comparable to. What I would say is, and it doesn't answer the question today, and I appreciate that, but what I would say is that there's some very big pieces of work ongoing just now about data from markets and how we use it and how we assign it to different topics and projects, and how we analyze it, and that is ongoing. It's you know, if you look for example at Frisian Holsteins and Holsteins, you know, it very heavily matters about how someone registers a calf, and quite often you might have a very Frisian herd where the owner of that has used at some stage a bit of Holstein blood to get size back in, or for whatever reason. And then it's just become very easy for them when they register their calves to put Holstein Friesian. And of course, when our members sell them, they scan the barcode on the passport, and it gives you the breed that is registered at BCMS. And we all know that a pure Friesian bull calf is worth, at sort of anywhere between 4 and 12 weeks old, is worth a lot more than a very extreme Holstein bull calf. But it is not a simple task to try and differentiate between them. So that doesn't help, but there is ongoing work on it. Now that we have a weekly meeting with AHDB's technical team on it to try and see if we can find a way of making it better and more reflective.
Great, thank you. So just in the interest of time, we're just going to wrap up the questions. So thank you all for your questions. If there's any we haven't answered, we'll get back to you offline. So if I could just hand you back to Nick. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And just a quick and shameless plug of the Shape the Future of Farming. And I think HDB, as you'll hopefully be all aware, is looking to move forward with more farmer views and the way that we can be more relatable and in contact with what farmers are looking for and expecting from us. Now, the registration is open at the present time. And I think what I'd like to do is just encourage you, and within the follow-up email that you'll get, there will be the registration link. I just encourage you to register for now, and that the actual The vote itself will open in April, but actually at the present time you will need to register to be able to participate in that vote. So if I could ask you just to click through, and it's literally a 2-minute job of basic details of your farm, email address, and it will take you through to that. So I thank everybody for participating today. We've had a great audience with some good questions, and thank you, Christian, for running it so smoothly. Thank you to all the presentations, not only for being on time, but also giving the depth of detail that hopefully gives people a good insight into what activity we've been carrying out through the dairy calf strategy. We'll continue this year to try and drive forward. I'd encourage you all to search out the activities that are through Calf Week, but also if you've got any more support and activity and involvement that you want to have with the calf strategy, then by all means, please do reach out to us through the questions. There is a questionnaire that will follow the finishing of the webinar. So if I could encourage you to just feedback on that as well, that will give us a view as to when we do another one of these later on in the year, which I expect we will, to try and sum up where we got to. And then it will give us a view with regards to whether you've appreciated the information in today. So thank you very much all, and I'll wrap it up there 4 minutes early, which is a miracle for me to finish anything early, so I appreciate that. Thank you for the questions as well. It's made it interactive at the end, and appreciate it all. Have a good day. Thank you.